how are trade associations doing with public affairs? What are the latest trends in what's a very evolving political landscape here in Europe? Well, welcome to this podcast by Kellen Europe, a leading association management firm working with trade associations in food, energy, agriculture, construction, clean tech, health, what have you, and also welcome here in the bump policy experience space, just across from the European Parliament, here on Place de Lux. So we're right in the middle of it, smack in the middle of it. And my guests, Teresa Scardigli, Managing Director of Kellen Europe, and João Sousa, Managing Director of Public Affairs Council Europe. You also have a place in Washington, as well as Kellen, too. You're both based also in Washington. And João, you're going to be talking about this new study that you've come out with called The State of European Public Affairs. It's the first time in Europe. It was done in the U.S., from your office in the U.S., since the 90s. So this is the first time. And it includes, what I thought was interesting, it includes case studies. It includes case studies with companies here, Solvay, Business Software Alliance, Pfizer. So also very interesting. It makes it more concrete and more real. The game plan, so we'll have a scene setter from João, and then we do some Q&A with the two of you, and then we open up out to you to Q&A, roving mic. We want your questions. And then we'll have a wrap-up after that. Tech tips, I think, as Maria has been talking about, yes, the roving mic, the hashtag, Associations Unplugged. If you hear something great, please cast it wider. Hashtag Associations Unplugged. And this is being recorded and will be edited for playback. Let's start, João, with a scene setter. If you can take just a few minutes, 5 minutes, it's almost like an elevator pitch because you got 24 pages to talk about. How's he going to do it? Let's see.
So let's go.
No, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, to Kellen for the invitation, and Chris for the kind, welcoming words. But so it's great to be here to talk a little bit about this new research that we published. The first time that we're doing this here in Europe. So first of all, again, introductions. My name is João Sousa. You said it already. I work with the Council's European office as well as our global practice. The Public Affairs Council is, perhaps some or many of you will know, it's a global association for public affairs professionals. We were founded in Washington, D.C. in the 50s. We've been growing there ever since, and about 10, 12 years ago, we opened our European office. And we help public affairs professionals, we bring public affairs leaders together, we help with executive education, and we do also a lot of research because we think that best practice gains when it's based on actual data and data points and research. So that's where our research comes in. This state of corporate public affairs, as it's called in the US, it basically surveys a number of public affairs leaders, 120 in the US. It's been around since the 1990s. And it's the first time we're doing this in Europe, which is exciting, particularly. Not just it allows us to identify best practices in Europe, but it also allows us to compare what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the US, which is always an instructive comparison. So just a couple of highlights. I will not go through 24 pages of report.
Okay,
I won't go
you.
through that. I'll spare you that effort. But one thing, and I think it's good to start on a good note and with good news, is that public affairs is becoming an increasingly strategic and senior role. Some of the numbers, and I apologize, I will have to look at my papers, but in terms of reporting lines, public affairs is increasingly reporting to the C-suite, including the CEO. 63% of the leaders we interviewed here in Europe, and I'm talking about our European report now, they report directly to the CEO, and another 23 report to another element of the C-suite. So really, really senior. The title of the most senior public affairs leader, so 68% say that they are the most, they are either part of the C-suite or they are in a vice president or executive vice president role. Very interesting, I think, to this audience is a second data point, which is reliance on trade associations. There is extensive reliance on trade associations for corporates, for companies. 96%, it's that much, of corporate public affairs leaders say that they rely either extensively or moderately on trade associations. 68 or 67% say that they rely extensively on their trade associations.
Is there an explanation why there's that increasing dependence?
I mean,
dependency, and also that it's going up the food chain in the chain of command that is becoming more important, as you
yeah.
said.
So I mean, I think there are many reasons. The reasons are manifold, but I think bottom line is that they are seeing the value of engaging in trade associations, the value of speaking at one voice.
Right.
You know, they gain access, and they notice that the industry associations have access to policymakers,
Right.
and that's I think something that even beyond this report is something that is that I hear quite often from our members here, is that policymakers do like to speak with associations, and then lastly, perhaps say this: geopolitics is back. So. More public affairs leaders, it's actually the top concern for public affairs leaders is politics, the impact of politics in their company, in their industry, both Brussels politics and European politics,
Yeah.
and beyond that, even what's happening in the world, in the US and so on.
Okay, so you set the stage. Let's go to Maria Teresa, and you've seen the report as well. And how has your experience with Kellen, and you've been with Kellen for 25 years, how have you seen this evolving? That associations, trade associations, are redefining the role of public affairs. How are you seeing that
Yeah,
on
so
the ground?
first maybe let me comment on what he said.
Sure.
I think one of the reasons why this has happened is also because there is a demonstration of the impact that trade associations have on public affairs. And that's why there is more reliance on the trade association, I believe, from the corporate side. Just to come back to your question,
Okay.
I think you have João mentioned that public affairs is becoming more strategic, and I think it has actually resulted on one way on the fact that public affairs are becoming more prominent in the activities of a trade association, and on the other side, the trade association is becoming central to this public affairs strategy that a corporation develop. On the third element is also that the public affairs encompasses a broad range of activities that
Right.
are all interconnected. So
Yeah.
before we had government relations, strategic communication, membership engagement, coalition management, they were all separated, you know, as activities on a trade association.
Because it's more centralized now.
Now everything
Yeah.
is interconnected
Yeah.
and under the umbrella of public affairs.
It's interesting you point out this thing of interconnection, because also in the Pfizer case, the case study of Pfizer in your report, you talk about a coordination between public affairs, or however you want to call it, advocacy, lobbying, combined with comms and business priorities. How do you explain that?
Well, how would you not explain that, right?
Yeah.
So if you're working for a public affairs function in a company, you need to understand the business, and you need to not forget that, well, your job description in the end is about bringing value to the business.
Right.
So I would actually talk about integration, right? I think that's really the word. Instead of centralization, is rather integration. It doesn't always work in the best way, not yet, but I think as these functions get more integrated, and I agree that's the trend, and I'd bring in also sustainability and CSR, which is increasingly part of the public affairs sort of scope. I think that's going to work better and better, and the business component there is very important, of course.
Yes, go ahead,
No, I want to
Teresa.
say, we do see it also in trade association that
Yeah.
before you had different type of title. You had a sustainability director, a public affairs director, a communication director, and now you still have this title, but they are all under a more broader umbrella of public affairs.
Okay. Can I go a little bit more on what João mentioned about how the public affairs is becoming more and more important for the C-suite, for the CEO even? And you've seen that personally, I can imagine.
Yes,
I mean,
definitely.
more PA leaders now report to the CEO. How do you see this impacting the way associations align with member priorities at the leadership level? How do you see that?
First of all, I think is the direct impact that we have seen is the fact that the trade association have become much more business oriented and much more professional and well structured. And then I think I would say that the impact is maybe, there are 4 elements of the impact. One is increased pressure. So there is a lot of pressure from the public affairs leaders to the association to demonstrate the value, the return on investment, and that they support achieving the corporate goal as well at the association level. The second element is tighter evaluation, meaning that the public affairs, when it is evaluated on the activities that the bottom line that has an impact directly on the companies. But then when the public affairs leader come in the association, they would evaluate the association the same way. I think in your report it was mentioned there is formal and informal method of evaluation, but there is always an evaluation because you really need to demonstrate that what you achieved, your activities, your deliverable, bring something back to the company. And our role is really to tailor the message towards the public affairs leader so that they come back to their CEO, to their direct report with business relevant insight. But we need to help this kind of communication towards the members so that they would help directly. And I think the last element is possibly even the most important is alignment of goal. I have seen more and more corporate representatives that come to the trade association and try to include their corporate goal, maybe broader corporate goal, on the trade association strategy. But this is actually a very nice win-win situation, because if the association succeeds, but automatically the corporation would also achieve its own corporate goals. So it's kind of everything is related.
Exactly. Yes.
Can I have a comment on?
I have another question for you, but go ahead.
Sure. I think it's instructive to also look across the Atlantic. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a similar report in the U.S. as well. And one of the things that that stuck with me as I was looking at the European results and the U.S. results, when it comes to how you measure and communicate the impact of your function. And this was not specific to trade associations, okay? This was broad corporate and trade associations, is that in the US, measurement on the basis of revenue generated and costs avoided is more common than it is in Europe. So I do think we still need to gain a little bit more that business acumen that our friends from across the pond have developed, and there's something to learn there.
Okay, and I've got a question for you on the regulatory landscape. How are associations redefining influence in an increasingly complex regulatory landscape? It's also very much a moving target, isn't it? As we see things develop here and across the lake.
Yeah, of course. I mean, things are moving fast, and as I said, geopolitics is back, and people are perceiving that, and so, in a sense, uncertainty is bad for business, but it's good for the public affairs business, if I can say it like this. Not that risk should be a business.
And good for journalists too, I think, actually.
So trying to see the positives in there and trying to see the opportunities. But sure, and I mean, if you're working in Brussels, of course, you have seen the landscape change. But you're still engaging a lot with EU policymakers. That is going to continue being your first sort of interlocutor here. But one of the things that we're seeing a lot as well, and we recently had, yesterday, we had our Brussels Public Affairs Forum, and one of the important takeaways there is look at member states as well. Look at national capitals. Don't neglect them, because, oftentimes the political guidance for what's happening in Brussels. Yeah,
they have the national governments have to carry out whatever regulations are approved here. So you do have to talk to them.
Yeah, of course. So you're interested in in being plugged into what's happening in national capitals. Now,
Yeah.
how does that work as a trade association? I'm sure Maria Teresa is much better equipped to answer that than I do.
Yeah, we do see a trend on the national association level. You know, before the trade association were primarily federation, so the members were the national association, and then in the past 15 years there was a reverse, and there was a more hybrid approach where the members company would join the trade association and the national association would become maybe associate member or a different type of members.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in which the trade association were questioning the role of the national association. But now I do actually always advise the trade association, especially the trade association that Kellen manage, to be very careful and very on how to manage the national association, because at the end of the day you need the national association to implement your advocacy at national level. They know much more than what we know, so it's a real cooperation between the European level and the national level. At the same time, the National Association helped the Trade Association to escalate some of the issues that are naturally kind of born at national level and can, in any case, come back at the European level.
Yep.
So this early warning system is also very, very important.
And this kind of segues into this next section that I want to go to, is reliance on trade associations and coalition management. Because how do you manage sector versus company agendas? In other words, how do you address advocacy efforts that must serve the broader sector interests, but also respect the company-specific agendas? Sometimes it doesn't always jibe, does it?
I think it's not easy. It's quite
It's not
complex.
easy,
But
right.
I think it's one of the differentiators that we have as a trade association professional is the ability to create consensus. And here I think I mentioned maybe before early this morning with you, but
Almost
I
as a
don't
disinterested observer, almost. I mean, somebody, a referee, almost, right? Because
Exactly.
I've seen that working with different trade associations for different events. And within those trade associations, you have competitors. Of course, they're competing against each other. How do you balance those interests? And that's maybe where you come in.
is creating a consensus.
Voilà.
But the consensus is not the minimum common denominator, that's not enough. When you actually reach a compromise, when you speak to your different members and you reach a compromise on a position, you give in something, okay? But at the end of the day, the outcome is to be better collectively. So it's not the minimum common denominator. This is never enough. It's much more. Okay, compared to what, maybe it's less than compared to what the company wanted it to, but it's not the minimum common denominator. And that's really our differentiator, the ability to create consensus amongst the members through also trust and respect.
Okay, so let's follow. Go ahead, João, and I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Sure. No,
No, please.
I think that's also a question for companies to ask themselves, which
Sure.
is, so we are a member of a trade or several trade associations. How does this bring value to us, right? And I think trade associations should also bear in mind, and they do bear in mind, that their members are thinking just that. And I think one of our case studies shows, and it certainly applies to others, is companies that that figure it out are the ones who use their associations for industry issues and then use their resources, which are limited, by the way. I mean, a company cannot do everything with its team. And when the sheer volume of legislation is so big, then you need to rely on others. And so you can then focus your company corporate resources on company-specific issues and business issues.
It's about managing company expectations, isn't it? I mean, your report shows 67% of companies rely extensively on their trade associations. What are companies expecting from those associations to make them indispensable?
Yeah, that's right. So you need that support. The volume of legislation is so high, so much is happening in the world, there's so much uncertainty to manage, and industries are facing trade issues, tariffs, and understanding how the trade association can help you there is very helpful.
All right, so fly on the wall, behind the scenes, how does Kellen deal with this? In the sense of, I mean, you set certain rules and parameters to do this, to manage it? How do you do that?
I would say.
Can you give us,
Yeah,
maybe without
based
naming
on my
names, can you give us an example?
Yeah, based on my experience, we actually manage numerous sector association. They're a little bit smaller maybe than the larger trade association, but the ability to create a consensus is a lot of the work behind the scene, as you mentioned. Mainly is building the relationship with your members and also gaining an understanding of what is their position, what is their view, what are their red lights that you cannot go beyond, what is their intention or possibility of negotiation as well. There is also the ability to create an environment which is open and transparent so that everybody will be able to share what are my concerns, what are my possible solutions as well, what are the challenges that I am facing.
Right.
And there is a lot of facilitation by the trade association secretariat to really smooth around. I have been in many meetings in which you really need to have a pause at a certain time because between the members you need to ask them, it's a time for a coffee, for example.
Voila.
And then you can take, you can speak to some of the members to try to understand the directions. And the last point is effective communication. I mean, you really need to be effective in the way in which you communicate and transparent and open so that everybody understands where they are, because that's where you create a sense of unity as well. We are all facing the same problem. And I don't want to say that we always manage to reach consensus. There are moments in which you need to agree to disagree, but you have tried your best in a sense.
Well, yeah, and stronger together, right, I guess.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, and it sounds a little bit like diplomacy, and you were a diplomat for quite some time, also in the Balkans, I saw, I think in Africa as well, so that those creds probably helped you in doing what you're doing now. But what about this aspect? This is also an important aspect about the performance of trade associations. You highlight in your study that many companies still lack formal ways to evaluate the performance of TAs, of trade associations. What methods do you see emerging? I thought the Solvay example was interesting, how they assess what they need. So first they start with risk and then they determine what they need, right?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, to the diplomat point, I work for the External Action Service, but I'm happy that I do not have to manage that sort of negotiation and diplomacy. So I totally defer to Maria Teresa.
You were even a
Kellen there.
spokesman, which I think is quite impressive.
But so to the question on metrics, well, I find that speaking to many of our members, and again, not just from trade associations, but more broadly, it's a little bit the million-dollar question. So how do you measure the impact of your public affairs work?
Yeah.
And how do you communicate that internally? I think you saw in the Solvay case study is a particularly interesting example of how a company and a team manages to translate into business translate business objectives into public affairs objectives,
Right.
and then factor in when it comes to measuring again and saying, okay, what did we achieve and how did that impact the business? So it's about trying to create opportunities, opening markets, and I think companies that manage to do that are most successful in proving value to the business.
Okay, I got a couple of minutes left. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because actually what we have developed in Kellen to the measurement is called, we use the system of OKRs, so objective key results. And that's, so first we define what are the strategic direction and the goals of a trade association. And then we look at what are those progress that need to be done in order to achieve that specific result, which is at the end of the goal. Or, I have spoken to others trade association, and I also speak about deliverables and what is the end result.
Yeah.
And I have seen in your report that maybe, the KPIs is not something that
I was going to say,
public affairs-
isn't this KPIs? But it's different.
It's a little bit different
Okay.
because you can also look at the progresses that you are made. So
I
what
see.
are the action that you are doing in order to achieve that specific result?
Right.
And I think the progresses sometimes are important because you cannot, there are so many, I would say, stakeholders in Brussels that it's difficult to say, well, I will achieve that for sure 100%. And then it's not a yes and no in public affairs,
Right,
okay?
right.
Even if you have not achieved what you wanted, maybe you have avoided something else as well. It might not be the
True.
perfect, but you have done everything. And also communicating back to the board is important.
Mhm. Yep.
Because often, sorry. yeah.
Yep, no, it's okay. I didn't mean to cut you off, but get your questions ready because we're getting close. But I want to have a couple of minutes on AI,
Yeah.
artificial intelligence. If we can cover that. The AI strategy, your survey, João, showed that only 11% have a strategic plan for AI. 11%. Why do you think this gap exists?
Yeah, so what that question asked was how many of you, and again, this was a question to public affairs leaders within European companies and associations.
Yeah.
And so what the question asked was, does your team have a roadmap for adopting AI within your public affairs team? And only 11% had that plan. Now,
Right.
a larger group was planning to develop a plan, or such a plan was already in progress. But a sizable number, about 20% or so, did not have a plan and was not considering developing a plan.
Yeah.
A sizable percentage was not even considering developing an internal AI use policy. That's actually the part that I found most shocking.
Yeah.
About 20% or 19% did not have that and were not considering developing such a policy. So that's something that I found particularly interesting. What I think about what I think is the stage where we are in AI right now is you see it everywhere. You see a lot of individual use of AI, but I think we are now at the stage of moving from individual use to team adoption, and that's the next step, the next challenge.
Maria Teresa, what is Kellen seeing as far as your clients, your trade associations, as far as
We are
AI?
developing a policy internally for the secretariat and for the staff in
Okay.
terms of use of AI. I believe that that's really a revolutionary tool, but it's a tool. So it's not gonna replace the human thinking. It's a tool, and I think at the moment, at least, how I see it. But it can be very useful for public affairs for a lot of different things. I mean,
Sure.
you put it and you have you ask this commission official or what are the key topics that this an MEP is looking at. Everything's, whether you use Copilot or ChatGPT. We are piloting at the moment Copilot at a global level because that's the only platform that really allow you to have a confidential research or studies.
Yeah.
You can ask AI to summarize a lot of different policy development. I know that some of my colleagues, they actually, when you have a position, they put it to test what could be the counter question that the Commission or the Parliament use,
Okay.
so that you can prepare yourself for very strong kind of the devil advocate, I would say,
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
And also someone else in my team told me this morning that they do the same for media journalists. What is the very difficult question that a journalist could ask you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I do that all the time with media training. I tell people, do that. Ask ChatGPT, what's the toughest, worst questions they could ask, and then be ready for it to bridge to your message.
Definitely.
And again, referring to the research, it shows that here in Europe, at least, summarizing reports, summarizing complex language is still the main use that most people make of AI.
It's a tool.
Whereas I do think that actually the best use of AI is to play with, generate new ideas, generate new content, brainstorm for me,
Definitely,
and think about difficult questions as a journalist from XYZ newspaper.
Okay.
So.
I think I'd like to go to questions now. We have someone over here, please. Can we run that mic over? That would be great. All right. If you give your name and title and serial number even, if you got it, that would be great. How about standing up? That would be great if you
There we
could.
go.
Yeah, so we can all see it.
Is the microphone on? Yeah. Hello. Good evening. My name's Roland Moore. I'm Public Affairs Director for Mars Incorporated.
Oh, okay. Welcome.
Thank you. João, Maria Teresa, thanks for your insights, and really great to have the behind the scenes on trade association management and also the public affairs aspects and your survey. I was struck also, by the point you mentioned about the public affairs reporting into the CEOs, and I have a question really about that, which is we see, in my experience, I've been in Mars for 2.5 years, and in our major trade associations, our industry associations, we have senior, we have business leaders in the boards.
Right.
Whereas perhaps in our smaller, or our sectoral ones, should we call them, which are not actually small in terms of the business, we don't. We have public affairs, corporate affairs, sourcing people, etc.
Okay,
So
the question
could you
then? Yeah.
offer a thought around how that, your insights into what works well in having board membership with the senior business leaders, and giving some insights into that, whether that's preferential, and how do you keep them engaged as well?
Yeah.
It's not just bring them in, and then, because AmCham, for instance, they don't have senior leaders in their board, but they do have an exco that's just for meeting people and just for networking.
Right.
They don't do decisions on how many paper clips we should buy and the
Right.
and the events, etc. But so just some thoughts.
Yeah,
Would be
and
great.
maybe could it? How much is it a help? How much could it be a hindrance as far as micromanaging? Maybe. I'm just raising that.
Speaking of micromanagement,
Yeah.
Thank you, Roland, for your question. So I think, first of all, this is true. In some of the smaller trade associations, in terms of less, sectorial, there are more public affairs people. However, very often we actually organize a business council or a platform where the business people and colleagues, your colleagues, would come once per year and really discuss about the commercial side as well, because the public affairs also need to understand on the ground and on the commercial side the two things, so that you can also refine the goals of the trade association. And I think another insight is that when you speak to the CEO, sometimes you can invite them for a specific decision. You really need to be very, very business oriented. You might have 1, 2, or 3 questions you prepare in advance. They know what to discuss, and so they know this is also a safe space, because when you invite a CEO who could be a very high level CEO, you will have in front of you a competitor, a CEO of another company.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not only that in terms of competition law, because that need to be very strict in any case, but it's also the concept of having a safe space where they can discuss what is relevant for the trade association.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And for the specific
Yeah.
goal.
João, you wanted to add to
Yeah,
that?
just one
right?
quick point, and thank you, Roland, for the question.
Yeah.
I think the one point I would add there is, and we asked this question in our report, and 53% of the corporate leaders we interviewed, they said that their CEO, it's one of the public affairs activities in which he or she is most involved with. So what this means for you is, well, if your CEO is not there, then you are losing something to your competitors. I think that's an important point. And for trade associations, what this also means is, well, this is a little bit the sort of the kind of network that you want to have weighing in as well, because this is going to bring also more weight to whatever the decision is, and sometimes sort of unblock those difficult conversations, perhaps.
Okay, we have another question over here, please. Yes? If you could stand up as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. My name is Jelte Wiersma. I'm the Secretary General, at least they call me like that, of SEMA, Europe's Agricultural Machinery Association. So we do tractors, combine harvesters, and if you disagree with us, we block the whole
Welcome,
SEMA.
SecGen. All right.
So we have the best lobby tool in our hands. Is there a matrix I could show my board saying, look, if you spend this much money, this is the outcome. If you throw this many people at a certain topic, this is the outcome. This is, of course, quantitative, but you can also look at it qualitative. If you speak to this person, this is the outcome. That would be extremely helpful.
I guess sometimes there are intangible.
I'm challenging
Yeah.
you
No,
here
it's a good question,
to
but I mean,
service in a better way.
there are a
Thank you
lot
very
of
much.
intangible assets, I guess. Maybe, Maria Teresa.
So your question, Jelte, was in relation to public affairs, to a public affairs strategy?
Yes.
There's no such thing as a menu, is there?
Look, we are all public affairs professionals over here. We have several years of experience, so it's difficult to provide, an advice on your specific. But what can I say? I think you really need to be thoughtful on what do you want to spend your resource on, because you don't have thousands of resources. So be thoughtful, and what is bringing the most value for your own association. I think one important element is also, the flexibility and adaptability of the public affairs strategy and approach. Try maybe something and see if it works. It's not monodirectional advocacy or public affairs, and then maybe you need to adapt at a certain point. But it's difficult, there is no silver bullet, I would say. So, use your resources as best as you have. Use your other members, your peers here. That's one of the reasons why we do this, to exchange and get best practices. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, and you started by saying we are all public affairs professionals, and I would perhaps even go beyond that and say we are all political science majors and coming from either law or communication or political science or international relations. So perhaps the numbers conversation doesn't quite come so natural, but in fact I think that's sort of the stretch that we need to try to have. So trying to speak to the business unit or to the business teams if you're a company, I don't quite have a comparable term to associations, but you will know better. So try to speak to the people inside the organization who speak the language of business. Go to national capitals and try to speak with them. And so sort of step outside the comfort zone of public affairs and try to see what they tell you so that you can sort of best find out what are the, what are the dollars and cents involved in these objectives.
I have barely 2 minutes left, but if I had to get 2 questions really quick at the same time, and then you can answer that. So, Monsieur here, quickly.
Okay, Pedro Diaz, Europe, very quickly. João mentioned before, in the US they are much more advanced in assessing the return of their investments in public affairs for trade associations. So, what lessons could we learn from the US? But also as trade associations, how can we help the members to do that work, to do that assessment?
Very good. If you could pass the mic over to Madame here. Briefly, please.
Hello, Nona McLewy. I lead EU Affairs for Unilever. Hi, MD. Quick question. How would you go about changing a trade association who's been in Brussels, let's say, for 30, 40 years? They're very used to kind of their way of doing things. And now you really want to bring some fresh blood. What would be your top 3 tips there?
Okay.
Wow, that could take a while, but
No,
briefly.
no, actually, for me,
Thank
the
you.
most important things, and it match both of your questions, is having a strategy. And you will be surprised how many trade associations don't have a strategy. And the strategy is the direction, clear goal, but that you can kind of measure the goals, okay? If you don't have it, it's also very difficult not only to evaluate the achievement and the result, but also the staff, so the secretariat as such. How can you evaluate the staff if you don't know they don't know what they need to achieve? So for me, strategy is the most important things. And then maybe secondly, to come back to you, Nona, it is really to have a very strong secretariat with a great leader, a person who really drive the association and the activities of the association.
And João, lessons learned stateside?
In 5 seconds. Sitting with the C-suite, I've mentioned earlier about how increasingly strategic public affairs is becoming. So sitting with that one or the several business leaders, and again going to the business teams, that would probably be my sort of one concern you should keep in mind. There are quite a few interesting examples, and we can talk about that afterwards, of companies that have managed to do regular councils, which is so internal meetings trying to figure out, okay, how does this issue fare when it comes, what's the impact of this issue on our organization, company, and how much is it going to cost us potentially?
Okay, and any other questions, any further backup questions? We're going to have a nice little drink upstairs, right, afterwards, so we can continue that. I need to wrap this up, unfortunately. The podcast is coming to an end, but what about final takeaways? What is, for each of you, in 30 seconds, what's one shift that you believe associations must embrace to remain influential in the next 5 years? What's one shift in the next 5 years?
It's the ability of the trade association to shift really the current narrative and the public opinion towards a more positive and balanced view of the industry.
Okay, all right. Yes, João.
5
please.
years is a long time these days.
It's an eternity.
Um,
That's right.
And so I think you have to keep that goal in mind, but also think short term. For trade associations, try as much as you can to prove your members the value that you're bringing to the table. Very important, I think. And then think beyond Brussels. We're here, and sometimes it's easy to get sort of bogged down, but it's very important to look beyond Brussels, even beyond Europe, I'd say, because more and more we are interconnected.
That's it. I think that's it. Thank you very much to everybody. A big hand to our speakers. A big hand to you for your questions. Thank you so much. Also to the techs here at the Bump Experience, thank you so much. And
thanks to
hashtag
you.
Associations Unplugged. Thank you. And hashtag Associations Unplugged. Please cast it wider. I'm Chris Burns. See you next time. Thank you very much. Thank you.